AntonioGarciaBooks.com presents Benny the Night Hunter, written and read by Antonio Garcia. Please take a moment to subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll give you a shout out in a future episode. Benny suddenly opened his eyes. There was no slow wake from his daily slumber. When the sun set, everything inside him became alert. He sat up and walked to the window. The glaring light hurt his eyes and heated his face, but this was the only time he could safely see the sun. After only a couple of minutes, it receded out of sight. He put the corner of the paper he had peeled off back into place, let out a sigh, and went to the bathroom to shower. Fully dressed, he threw on his black leather trench coat, grabbed his keys, and walked out of the apartment. "Benny!" the bartender shouted as he walked into his regular early evening hangout. "Hey, Tony," he said, making his way to the bar counter. Tony slid him as usual. Benny held it up in thanks and sat down at his favorite table in the corner. As it got darker, more people started to arrive, and it wasn't long before the bar was packed. Being a Saturday night, Benny wasn't surprised. Nothing ever surprised him anymore. He had been alive for over 100 years, and having traveled the world, he'd seen every variation of crowds there could be. The clothing might change, but the people themselves never did. He watched from his corner as more people arrived and formed into different sized groups. "Can I sit here?" a girl asked, pointing to an empty chair at his table. Benny berated himself for missing the extra chair. He normally moved all of them to other tables so no one would interrupt him like this girl was doing now. He didn't know what to say. Normally, he would tell the person to piss off, but there was something in her eyes that attracted him. All he could do was point his hand at the chair and nod. She sat down. "Thank you," she said. "It's packed in here tonight." He only nodded sheepishly. "Why are you sitting here all by yourself?" she asked. He started. "I usually prefer to be alone." Disappointed, she asked, "Would you like me to leave?" "No, please stay," he answered sincerely. "I'm Jill," she said. "I'm Benny," he replied. They talked late into the night, when Benny looked at his watch and said he had to leave. "Oh, an appointment?" she asked. "Yes," he answered. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "I'd like that," he replied. "I'm here almost every evening until around this time, when I have to go to work." She smiled and said, "What job lets you drink before you go into work?" "I'm a programmer," he lied. "I work from home." "Oh, cool," she said. "Well, I hope I get to see you again soon." "I'd like that," he said again. "Me too," she said, smiling. He got up and said a final goodbye and walked out into the darkness. As he walked down one alley after another, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He wasn't sure how long he could keep up the charade of who he pretended to be. He could never go out with her during the day, and he had responsibilities to perform every night. But he was also attracted to her and wanted to keep seeing her as long as he was able. He took a quick glance around to ensure no one was watching him, and then quickly climbed up the fire escape ladder to the roof of a building. He pulled a ski mask from his pocket and put it on. Once his face was covered, he walked to the ledge, squatted, and waited until he heard what he was waiting for. It wasn't long before the sound came. He stood up and began running in the direction of the commotion. When he arrived, he found a couple surrounded by a half-dozen men who were taking turns shoving and hitting them. Benny pulled out a piece of metal with a handle. He pushed the button, and the metal expanded into a short sword. The men laughed as the couple fell to the ground. They preferred their meat tender. As soon as the couple hit the pavement, 3 of the men's heads flew off their body as Benny decapitated them with one swing, jumping past them. As their bodies collapsed, Benny turned to face the 3 men that were left. "Benny, you little shit," one of them spat at him. "You're really becoming a pain in our asses." Benny only smiled. The men opened their mouths to reveal fangs. "I'm going to enjoy this," the man said as he charged. The couple ran off screaming as Benny took out each man one by one with little effort. It was his policy to ensure that there were none of the men alive that could report what had happened. Each time Benny was eventually discovered, he would have to move cities. He wiped off his short sword and collapsed it, putting it back into his jacket pocket. He hated what he had turned into, what his father turned him into. His father had been a mob boss when he was turned into one of those things. When Benny had come of age, his father invited him to one of his secret meetings, and without even asking if he wanted to become a bloodsucker, his father turned him. At first, Benny played ball. He ran with the crew, looting, killing, and stealing, but as time went, he grew sick of what he had become. One night, while they were running with the pack, as they were about to kill a group of teenagers, he turned on them and killed them all. Realizing what he had done, he left the city to find his own way, He learned martial arts from master after master, and when he had perfected his form, he decided to take the fight to them. What he hadn't realized was that his father's crew was only a small part of a much larger network. He soon found himself traveling the country hunting until he was discovered, and then fleeing to somewhere else. After a series of turns down streets and alleys, he climbed a fire escape to a roof. He jumped from rooftop to rooftop until he reached a building close to where he lived and climbed down to the ground level again. He could easily jump down from the buildings without injuring himself, but he didn't want to draw unnecessary attention. He could always explain away climbing down fire escapes. As he passed his local watering hole, he saw the girl Jill standing outside the front door smoking. He was torn between getting home or crossing the street to talk to her, when the decision was made for him when she saw him and waved. Reflexively, he waved back. She threw down her cigarette and jogged across the street to him. "Hi, Benny," she said, jumping onto the sidewalk. "I thought you had to work." "I did," he stammered. I do. I just took a short break. I'm about to get back into it." He could see the disappointment in her eyes. "But I can take a little longer break," he said, which made her smile. They walked along the street, Jill telling him everything about herself. Whenever she asked him questions about himself, he only gave vague but believable answers. Before he knew it, they were standing in front of her apartment building. Shyly, she asked, "Would you like to come up?" Benny was unsure. It had been a very long time since he had been with a woman. He had been so focused on his mission that he hadn't even thought about being intimate with anyone before. "Sure," he replied with an embarrassed cough. Making love to Jill was much more natural than he thought it would be, and it wasn't until she finally fell asleep in his arms did the sadness overcome him, as he realized he would have to leave before the sun came up. He wrote her a small note, ending with that he hoped to see her the next night, and then slipped out the door. He barely made it back to the apartment before the sun began to rise. The next night, he woke up with a smile on his face. In the note he had left Jill, he had asked her to meet him at the table that same time they had met the first night. He quickly showered, got dressed, and ran out the door. "Benny!" Tony called out to him as he walked in. "You look especially happy tonight." Benny was smiling when he grabbed his usual drink and went to sit at his table. As the time she was supposed to be there came and passed, Benny became depressed. Could I have been wrong about our connection? He asked himself. Maybe for her it was just a one-night stand. He finished his drink and was about to get up and leave when a large, burly man grabbed a chair and sat down across from him. Benny knew immediately that he was a vampire, though he knew he couldn't do anything to him while there were so many witnesses. "What do you want?" Benny hissed. "Calm down," the man said. "I only come to deliver a message." Benny only scowled at him. "You've been very busy over the years, killing your own kind," the man said. "Your time is up. You are to turn yourself over to us, or your little human girlfriend will be our late-night snack tonight." Benny's scowl vanished as he completely understood what the man was implying. Knowing there was nothing he could do while they were in the bar, and not until he knew where they were keeping Jill, he stood to follow the man out into the night. He knew that he could kill this man now and disappear, but he was unable to leave Jill to them to do as they pleased. They approached an SUV where he was shoved into the back seat and a hood thrown over his head. He felt someone's hand pat him down, find his weapon, and take it out of his pocket. 30 minutes later, he heard the vehicle turn into some gravel and come to a stop. His hood was torn off his head, and he was shoved back out of the vehicle where he fell to the ground. He looked around and saw that there were about 20 men he could see, and they all looked pissed. Out of the shadows came a familiar face. His father. "Benny, my boy," he started. "You put me in a very bad spot. After you turned on us, I was tasked to find you or die because of you. As you can see, I chose the former." Benny only stared at him, his eyes filled with hatred. His father raised his hand and a couple of goons brought Jill into the light for Benny to see. "You have me, so let her go," Benny spit at them. "You're right," his father said. "We do have you, and have no need for her." Before Benny could react, his father reached over and tore out Jill's throat, spraying blood all over himself and the floor. As her body fell to the floor, Benny fell to his knees, holding back tears. His father took 2 steps forward and said, "Now it's your turn, my boy." Staring at Jill's lifeless body, he didn't even feel all the punches and kicks they were landing on him. And then a glimmer of light caught his attention. One of the men that was striking him was holding his weapon. Benny took a deep breath, and when the man came down with another blow, Benny grabbed his arm, headbutted him, and pulled his weapon free. He pushed a button and extended his short sword. As the blows continued, his eyes turned blood red as adrenaline and hate began to fill him. With one swing, he took off a man's head. They all stopped their attack in surprise, but but once they realized what had happened, they all growled and charged at him. Benny took blows as he slashed, but his attackers were younger than him and didn't have the training he had, so he began to cut through them one by one. Blood covered the walls, blood splattered the windows, and bodies began to fill the floor. In the end, Benny was covered in blood, some his, but mostly theirs. He limped to Jill's lifeless body and said his apologies. He stayed over her body as long as he could, but he knew the sun would be up soon. Off to one side, he heard a slight groan. When he turned and looked, he saw that it was his father bleeding out nearby. Benny stood up and limped to where his father lay. His father's eyes widened when he saw Benny standing over him. Benny dropped to one knee, looking up and down his father's body at his injuries. "You're going to die," Benny said. His father only looked at him, blood spilling out of him. "All you did was remind me why I will spend the rest of my life hunting you monsters down," he continued. "I want you to know, Father, that in the end, it was me who beat you. I want you to know that from this day forward, every beast will know of your failure. You are my message to them." As his father looked up at him, Benny took his short sword and shoved it into his father's eyes and watched as he gurgled his last breaths. He pulled the sword back out, wiped it on his father's chest, collapsed it, and put it back into his jacket pocket. Without looking back, he limped out of the warehouse and into the darkness. I hope you enjoyed this reading of my short story, Benny the Night Hunter. Become a patron on Patreon to see the behind-the-scenes videos of the Short Story Podcast. Please remember to take a moment to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Every new subscriber will get a shout-out in an upcoming episode. These short story podcasts are uploaded every week to YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and my website, AntonioGarciaBooks.com. There you can also order a signed copy of my mystery novel, Sins of the Fathers, and pre-order my upcoming fantasy novel, Black Knight. You can show your support by following me on Goodreads, Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, and Spreaker, all of which are listed on my website. Again, I hope you enjoyed this short story, and you join me again next week.